Good morning and welcome to today's webinar, Introduction to SharePoint Self-Service Apps for PeopleSoft. My name is Glenn Johnson and I'm joined today by Ryan Beck.
Good morning, Glenn.
Good morning, Ryan, and thanks everyone for joining us today. We have a beautiful sunny day here in Southern California and we hope that you're having a great day wherever you are around the world. We're looking forward to getting directly into today's topic. We'll ask that if you have any questions, you please would type them into the chat box and send them to the host and presenter. The names of the participants in today's webinar are not shown in order to protect your privacy. We'll go ahead now and just begin with today's topic. Self-service apps, of course, are a big point of discussion for many organizations. Many of you who are running PeopleSoft have some of the PeopleSoft self-service apps, employee self-service, manager self-service, customer self-service. Some of you may even have student self-service from the university environment. And self-service, as a concept, is something that is always ready. It's available to us when we need it. There's easy access. You get just the flavor you want. It's scalable to any size, and it's very efficient. It reminds me of my favorite yogurt shop, Velvet Yogurt, down in San Clemente, California. They, have all these different flavors on tap anytime I want it, and I can just go in and get just the amount I want, so it's very scalable. And it's a very efficient way for them to serve their customers because, man, let me tell you, they have a lot of business down there. So self-service is something that, when it becomes an IT concept, also becomes very appealing because it allows people to engage in business processes whenever they need to, based on their roles and responsibilities and the kinds of things that should be available to them. But when we start to do that, there are a number of things that become involved. Self-service has some interesting implications in terms of workflow and as a workflow concept because, first of all, it's user-driven. A lot of the processes are initiated by members of our target audience, whether they be customers, employees, managers, and so on. It's a very efficient way of doing things. It puts some of the burden of the task onto the recipients of the benefit themselves. And it can also, when you add workflow concepts to the idea of a self-service portal, then you can introduce the service-oriented architecture principles where these various services are available and waiting to interact with your self-service apps in a variety of different ways. What's interesting is that while there are nice self-service programs available from Oracle as part of the PeopleSoft family, we're starting to see a large number of impromptu or ad hoc apps coming out of the SharePoint environment that are accomplishing much the same purpose, that are also providing self-service capabilities to users in the areas of employees, managers, and customers, but also in some other interesting areas like investor self-service or some capabilities around different kinds of needs that people have for their various interest groups. So in order to support this, it's important to have a back-end enterprise service bus or service-oriented architecture type of environment that's really going to be able to deal with all of these event triggers that are taking place in SharePoint and integrate and orchestrate back-end processes. So we want to talk about SOA in the sense that we need to have the ability to deal with triggers, to be able to provide services that can be consumed by our self-service apps and to be able to consume those services and basically to support a type of human workflow service architecture, which is really a reference model for how we can build flows, we can build business processes that deal with this concept of self-service. Now, a human workflow system is based obviously on human interaction as the essential element of the business process, and it's very important when we have automated systems to recognize that there are human actions that are required. So we have asynchronous, long-running business processes, and so human workflow is going to support and automate the communication between people and the systems that they use, whether those be SharePoint portals or the back-end ERP systems such as PeopleSoft, and how it is that we can trigger and automate certain aspects of the process automatically in a back-end fashion, and other aspects of the process that require human interaction, perhaps some email-based processes that are automated in there as well, portal-based processes, and so on. So a human workflow services architecture might look something like this, where you have your business process management systems and your client applications that can often act as triggers and receive feeds and information from human workflow. And a human workflow set of service-oriented architecture tasks or flows might look something like this, where you have a basic core task management service that's doing the functionality of managing the core of the human workflow task. Now, an identity service would basically be called by that task management service to find out who's available to perform a specific task. So when a particular workflow is triggered and initiated, it's using the identity service to find who can perform that task, and then to assign that. The task management service then uses the notification service, which typically will, be aware of the multi-channel preferences of individual users and then notify them via that method. So it might send an SMS to that particular user at a particular time. It might send an email. It might simply queue work up in a user portal self-service application. There are a variety of different ways that human workflow can be orchestrated based on the notification service knowing the user preferences and maybe even having certain times of day or certain states that the user is in, such as they're out of the office, that will trigger different kinds of interaction that are necessary. Now, to do that, they may be accessing through the identity service various directories, and that could be address book information back up in PeopleSoft or other kinds of directories. And then there's typically a tracking service, which is paying attention to the status of a particular task in an overall workflow chain. So the status information can be useful in various kinds of tracking repositories or even project management applications such as Oracle's Primavera or other kinds of project management tools that you might be utilizing in order to keep track of what's going on in an organization. So they could actually subscribe to the tracking service in order to find out what the status is of what's going on, or you could simply have another SharePoint application that acts as a tracking repository and tells you what the status is of all this, or feed it back into your self-service application. So this idea of a human workflow services architecture is really just about a set of services which could be flows, for example, in Magic Software's ibolt integration platform that are managing on a routine basis unique instances of each of these kinds of tasks or services that need to be engaged in. So let's just talk briefly then about human workflow task states. Basically, we think about a task as having a life cycle, or a task may be pending, a task may be claimed or accepted. At some point, after having been accepted, in the human workflow, the person performs the task they need to do. They report it as being performed, or the system senses automatically that it has been done, and then the status could become completed. Or perhaps there was an exception, and the status for that particular task might be failed. These are kinds of task states that relate to the task life cycle. Another kind of task state relates to the time frame of the task, where it may be that a task needs to become escalated, in which, for example, the requirement for performing a task could move after a certain period of time from the domain knowledge worker up to the supervisor level, and so that person's supervisor may suddenly have that task escalated to them. Or it could be a delegated task where in a certain time frame, if action hasn't been taken, then it's delegated in a certain way. The task may simply expire. If it isn't acted upon within a certain time, it may be deemed as having no value as a task any longer, and so it could go into an expired status. Or there could be certain events within the system that could cause a task to be renewed based on time frame and so on. So there are various kinds of business rules and logic that could be applied in this type of approach. Another thing that we need to think about then is the overall pattern of the workflow. What is the task assignment pattern? Are we talking about a single user workflow where one user needs to go through a series of steps, or is it a sequential workflow where you have basically a series of different users that need to go through steps, or is it a parallel workflow where there are a number of tasks that can be performed all at the same time, a lot of different people working on them? Here again, based on the workflow task assignment pattern, then we might take a different approach. And then ultimately, this results in what are known as task assignment policies. And with a task assignment policy, we think of, is it single user with escalation? In other words, we then are thinking about the overall business rule that is related to a particular type of workflow and the tasks within that workflow. Maybe it's single user with delegation. Maybe it's a task change pattern where it has to go step by step through a series of different kinds of approvals and other kinds of processes that have discrete tasks that are a part of this. Now, a task should be atomic. It should be an individual unit of work. And for example, it could be that even the assignment of a task, there's I think a temptation to think of that as a state, but it's really a task in itself. So assignment is probably something that you need to treat as its own task, and then it would have a task status such as pending and claimed and so on, completed as we suggested. Now, with the use of SharePoint, there are a number of different business processes that can be a part of a SharePoint application that could be relevant for employee self-service, could be manager self-service, customer self-service, and so on. But one of the areas where we see the most overlap, the most demand and need, is in the area of human resources. Human resources information systems and the ESS and MSS applications of PeopleSoft are areas where there's been a lot of overlap with SharePoint, because SharePoint is suddenly becoming a very useful kind of tool for reaching a large number of users, even those who are not currently ERP users. And so one of the options is to supplement a self-service app, or simply use SharePoint instead of the self-service module, and that is certainly one of the things that organizations are considering. And in the area of HR, there are a lot of HR functions, for example, where this can come into play. These could be things like new hire requisitions and the processes related to that, where there are a number of SharePoint applications available for new hire. Could be related to employee training, so it could be assigning people for training. It could be employee self-service as it relates to training and the training that they want to sign up for and participate in, approvals for that, and in the manager self-service aspects and so on. Could be resource capacity planning. Who do we have available to work on particular projects at particular times? SharePoint applications are available in this area to be used in the project management office in a PMO sense and so forth. Or we may also be talking about simple time card management, and how a person checks in and checks out each day, how they assign and attribute the work that they perform during the day to particular projects and so on. There could be PTO, paid time off request forms, that are managed within SharePoint that become self-service apps within an organization and can integrate on the back end to PeopleSoft. Employee expense reports might be another self-service area where we allow employees to submit and manage their expense report submissions via a SharePoint application, and then have manager approvals and ultimately integration into back-end systems through accounting approval processes and so on. And then even with employee performance evaluations, we see another hot area for use of SharePoint applications, and in some organizations we're even seeing things like attrition management being managed in SharePoint applications. So there's a wide variety of human resources related tasks that are being managed in SharePoint applications that can have implications for our employee self-service module within PeopleSoft, or our manager self-service module, or may simply act as alternatives in some instances to that functionality. And we are seeing very interesting ESS kinds of SharePoint apps that are bubbling up within organizations as well. In that sense, SharePoint is really considered to be a disruptive technology. I also like to call it a game changer. It's a technology that is being adopted sometimes on an ad hoc basis, sometimes in a very planned manner, of course, as well. But it's because SharePoint can be used in so many different ways, it's causing people to kind of step back a little bit and reevaluate how are we as an IT department going to manage this? How are we going to handle what's going on in SharePoint and integrate it into our overall data environment, as well as manage the orchestration of the business processes that are a part of it. Because people are using SharePoint as a content repository for enterprise content management. Some people are using it for portal and web content management, document workflow, general business process management, and in many instances, the provision of custom applications, such as we're talking about today with self-service apps. So this kind of use here that we see shown in the chart is telling us that people are using it for more than one thing. SharePoint is not always viewed the same, but it's also viewed as being capable of performing multiple tasks within the organization. All of them, however, centering around the interface of information and documents with our users. And so it's a very exciting technology, one that's causing a lot of people in organizations to consider how they can better integrate their business processes around SharePoint, because they are finding that there's this gap. There's this sense that the information in SharePoint and the information in the backend systems doesn't automatically integrate, and so you can have duplicate data, you can have ambiguities in data, and so forth, which you want to avoid, as we always try to do in IT. So unfortunately, it's kind of this every system for itself, where the systems are isolated. SharePoint users and ERP users, therefore, are having to coordinate with one another, resorting to manual tasks, telephone calls, emails being used to pass information back and forth, and switching between multiple applications in order to kind of verify that the data is properly aligned. The result is that it's a very slow process. It's prone to human error, and there's an operational cost that comes into every process as a result. Ultimately, people don't like it much either. There's a sense of employee dissatisfaction that festers as a result of the fact that they're using systems that should be integrated, that should be orchestrated together, but are not. No system should be treated as an island. It's really important to integrate PeopleSoft and SharePoint in order to maximize the output that you're getting from the systems, reducing these errors and costs, increasing employee satisfaction, improving customer service in many instances, and basically improving overall organizational efficiency. And the key is, of course, to find a way to do that, and that's what we're here to talk to you about today, is how to bridge that gap properly. How is it that you can actually effectively integrate PeopleSoft and SharePoint in order to provide these self-service apps that are accomplishing the things that you want in your organization? Well, the good news is, of course, that interfaces are available. PeopleSoft provides the component interface, application messaging, web services, and the PeopleSoft Integration Broker has an integration gateway that's basically capable of passing and receiving application messages. It's even backward compatible with XML and the older PeopleSoft application messaging protocols. So that is basically taken care of through the gateway, and there's even this thing called an integration engine, which is handling messages that are received from the gateways, and it's supporting PeopleSoft unique row-based message formats and non-row set-based message structures as well, such as XML and document object model messages, SOAP, web services, non-XML files, and so on. So one might think, okay, great, I have everything I need. But the problem is there's no way to orchestrate and transform the data between this PeopleSoft integration broker and SharePoint automatically. Because SharePoint has web services, and you have web services in PeopleSoft, but they don't talk to one another. They just sit out there, and they're just communicating into the black hole of the internet. But they're not communicating with one another. So you need a way to orchestrate them together, and of course that's what we're here talking about today. the interesting thing about the PeopleSoft integration broker is that it really has been improving over time, and in fact, the ability of some other tools to work with it has been improving over time. But the important thing that Magic Software wants to share regarding this is that the ibolt integration platform is capable of working with all of the PeopleTools versions that you might have, going all the way back to just simple component interfaces that we can interface with, as well as the more modernized PeopleSoft integration broker approach through web services and so on. We're providing a very flexible integration tool that allows you to accommodate the PeopleTools version that you might happen to be on. Hopefully you're on later versions, but we know not everyone is, and so the good news is that you can integrate by the version with the ibolt. So ibolt is automating PeopleSoft integration to the web PeopleSoft integration broker and brokering all the communication between that and your other web services and systems that you might have available, including those through SharePoint, of course. So Magic's ibolt integration platform is a secure environment. It's very scalable. It handles the triggering of background processes and workflow, monitoring what's going on in your environment, doing the transformation of the data, and then exchanging application-to-application messages as needed, or web services, depending upon the approach that's particularly needed at that time. And it's very much unlike traditional middleware in that it's code-free. There's never a need for line-by-line programming. With a lot of middleware platforms, at some point you've got to break out the programming books and figure out how to do the Java programming or whatever that might be required to do particular tasks like, I don't know, SNMP or something like that. There also, with traditional middleware, are a lot of different modules. It gets very confusing because of the fact that there are 40 or 50 different products that are all called WebSphere, that are all called Fusion, or that are all under one of the other brand names that comprise a traditional middleware set. And the fact of the matter is that those product lines were put together by a series of acquisitions, and so you can often have differing approaches, overlapping middleware approaches, and that just doesn't make sense. You want middleware to be able to resolve the differences between systems, not introduce new differences and new overlaps. And so the nice thing about the ibolt integration platform is that it's a coherent approach from a single vendor that allows you to achieve your results in hours or in days, not big month-long, year-long type projects that a lot of the larger enterprises who take the heavy middleware approach unfortunately get bogged down in. And so the key to the performance factor is that the integration platform leverages metadata for its platform capabilities, so that you're working with things like components and rather than having to write code. You're also able to take a visual approach to working with those components, so that rather than a line-by-line kind of program, you actually have a visual business process flow that you can configure, and Ryan's going to show us that in just a couple minutes. And then it also gives you this capability for true enterprise class business process orchestration with a very scalable environment that can handle the real-time event processing that you need in your organization. Now, we should point out that this integration platform does more than just the simple point-to-point integration of SharePoint to your PeopleSoft backend. It also can handle integration of other environments, and this can be very important because in a self-service app, it could be that there's information from the supply chain system, or from a specialized HR system, or from a Salesforce or other CRM application, or some kind of new mobile app that you've got running on or an iPad app, or whatever it might be. So you need a system that's flexible enough that it can integrate all of these things, and that's what we're talking about here today, is a true application integration platform that can take you into all these different kinds of areas of integration and still do the triggering of events, the orchestration of the business process, sending and receiving of emails and attachments and things like this, in a true service-oriented architecture approach based on web services and other kinds of available methods for this. So with the SharePoint to PeopleSoft integration that we're talking about in ibolt, we're using the PeopleSoft integration broker, we're using SharePoint services, and orchestrating the business processes between them. And ultimately, this is giving us the capability to work with the various self-service modules and other modules of PeopleSoft to integrate e-commerce, do things like catalogs and pricing very easily, being able to create custom processes, trigger those off, and really extend and enhance the availability of your systems to all of your ERP users, to all of your SharePoint users, so that even though they might not have access to the other system, they have access to the information in that other system. They have the ability to take action in their system that triggers events and processes in the other systems in order to have the most efficient kind of interface in front of them and enable them to do what it is that they need to do. So from an architectural standpoint, PeopleSoft Enterprise is working with the PeopleSoft integration broker, and then the ibolt integration platform is orchestrating and communicating with all of your other systems, whether those be mobile devices, cloud kinds of applications such as Salesforce.com, various Oracle Edge applications such as Primavera or Agile PLM, and then, of course, third-party applications that you might have in your environment as well. Serving up all of that information as needed to SharePoint users in their SharePoint applications, and then, of course, managing all of the orchestration and synchronization of data and business processes across all of these systems, utilizing a very large library of components that allows you to work efficiently, various methods and processes. And what Ryan is going to show us is the studio environment, the monitor environment for ibolt, that is basically designing and then monitoring what's going on in the ibolt server on the back end. The benefit to your organization of what you're going to see is that there's no programming involved. You avoid the expensive heavy middleware. You only have one SKU, not dozens of SKUs to work with, giving you a faster time to ROI and an ability to accelerate PeopleSoft business processes and extend them to your full enterprise. Just a word about Magic Software before I hand the ball over to Ryan. We do provide not only the software that you need in order to have an integration platform in your environment, but also the vendor support that you need, ranging from high-end strategic consulting on how to go about a process to actually helping you with the management of a project if that's needed, delivering the services, professional services and staffing that you need in order to complete projects if you need that, and of course providing maintenance and support for the software that we provide. So this is a very valuable kind of approach, I think, and one that we're eager to work with all of you in providing the best kind of vendor support that we can to your specific needs and your specific projects. And so we really want to have a conversation after today's webinar that you can explain to us what it is that you were hoping to accomplish, what it was that piqued your interest in today's webinar, and really giving you a reason to talk with Magic Software. You probably know that we're traded on the NASDAQ exchange under the ticker symbol MGIC, that we're a Gartner and Forrester ranked visionary and top performer for application and integration platform solutions. You may not be aware that we have a presence in more than 50 countries worldwide. We provide, as a result, 24/7 support, a global network of professional services. Our U.S. headquarters are here in Laguna Hills, California, but we have global offices, including a world headquarters in Israel and offices around the world, with support through distribution network to, as I said, more than 50 countries. We're a very solid and stable company. We had revenues reported for last year of $113 million, operating income of $14.7 million, a cash flow from operations of over $10 million, and a very solid balance sheet with basically zero debt. So this is an excellent picture for the most recent year, but it's also, we're very pleased to say, part of an ongoing trend. If you look at the 5-year trend of operating income and net income, basically profitability, we've had a very solid picture so that you know that you're dealing with a reliable partner who's going to be around for a long time. So at this point, what I'd like to do is pass the ball over to Ryan Beck, and he is going to as the presenter, be able to share his desktop. And when Ryan does that, we'll see his ibolt system and get an idea of the actual hands-on process that's involved in working with SharePoint and PeopleSoft. Right?
Great. Thank you, Glenn. Okay, what we got for you guys is a live demonstration of using ibolt to actually hook up a PeopleSoft environment into SharePoint. So, on the topic of self-service portals, we had a scenario here where we had our PeopleSoft installation, and of course all of our HR people are using it, and one of the things they're going to have in there is vendors. We might want to have the ability for employees on the outside to manage vendors. Obviously it's a requirement for working with POs, and obviously your vendor base could be very dynamic. So getting the employees to manage vendors might require you actually give them all PeopleSoft logins and train them how to use it and get them in here, and obviously you're already scared of that, so I wouldn't go about it. So the easier way to go about it is to actually put a portal outside that's integrated with this, that gives us basically a way to move information bidirectionally between your PeopleSoft vendors, and in this situation we're going to use SharePoint. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new vendor to SharePoint by entering it in PeopleSoft, or editing it actually. And what I'll do is I'll just grab one, choose Magic because that's us. And I'm going to go ahead and edit this vendor by hitting correct history. And for you PeopleSoft people, you know what I'm doing. For the rest of you, you'll just have to trust me. I'm editing the address of a vendor here. So it says 3 Main Street. So we'll save it, change it to 5 2nd Street. Unit, I don't know, 4. And you'll notice on here this is vendor number 49, and that's the short vendor ID, things like that. This vendor is not currently in SharePoint. If I go back here and I refresh it, you'll see there's nothing here yet. That's because it's actually an event-driven synchronization. What's going to happen here in PeopleSoft, when I hit the Save button, which is down here, it's going to cause PeopleSoft to launch an outbound web service call. That one's going to be calling ibolt. And then ibolt's going to in turn process the information, figure out if it should go to SharePoint or not, and then send it on its way. So ibolt's going to be doing the translation. There's no way to really, well, there's not really a good way to get PeopleSoft to call SharePoint directly. They don't really speak the same language. They have different schema web services and all kinds of things. So I'm going to hit Save. After a couple seconds, I'll come back over to my vendor sync, and I'll just keep hitting F5. You'll notice it actually popped up here as a new vendor down at the bottom. See that? So that Magic 333 came in, and it came in and used the address that I entered on the new address. So basically, it was able to go ahead and use that. Also, if I wanted that, it knew to create a new record in SharePoint because this was actually non-existing. If I had updated it, so if I go back and I don't know, I'll change this again to Unit 6. Hit Save. Come back. After a couple seconds, actually, it'll update this one again. F5. There we go. This changed over to Unit 6. So it's basically a real-time, event-driven synchronization coming from PeopleSoft to SharePoint. And I said it was obviously a portal that allows you to manage your vendors from SharePoint. So we're going to actually do something pretty cool. We can actually modify the information here and send it back. So all I need to do is just get out of this vendor in here. So I want to come back into him in a minute. I'm going to go ahead and modify it in SharePoint. And then what will happen is something pretty cool. It's going to send it back. So I'll just say that I want to change it. I'll say it as a C action. And then I'm going to go ahead and let's just say, I don't know, let's put the unit to, or let's put it to 15 2nd Street. Now the trip back requires a bit more validation. What's actually going to happen is ibolt's going to submit this. ibolt's going to realize that this was changed in SharePoint using our SharePoint adapter, and then it's going to go ahead and submit the change to PeopleSoft. PeopleSoft will not actually modify it right away. What happens is we now have in here a transaction ID. This transaction ID came from PeopleSoft. It's sort of my check to know that it made it to the other side. That transaction ID takes a couple seconds, maybe up to a minute, to process. PeopleSoft does some validation, ibolt does some validation, things like that. And then eventually it'll make it across to the other side. But it's not right away because you might have some things going on in the middle. But actually, it actually did already update to 15. So that worked right away. But you could put other things in the middle, such as workflow, sort of change approval, things like that. But in this situation, you can see it just came right in. Also, we see that who it was modified by and when. It was at 11:34 a.m., which is about now, and it was modified by BP1. That was actually the user ibolt's using, but you could actually assign ibolt a service account, and then any changes coming in, you could see exactly who. You could actually see exactly who did it. Anytime we use ibolt to connect to another system like this, we actually try to use the vendor's API, which in this situation is web services. Oracle's providing a bunch of web services on PeopleSoft, and ibolt's able to work with those. Same thing on the SharePoint side, there's web services available, but we're actually using an adapter. We're using our SharePoint adapter because it knows how easily to use the web services. So this is just a really, really simple sort of just shows you the foundation of how you can create a sync between two unrelated, non-interoperable systems, such as PeopleSoft and SharePoint, that don't know anything about each other. Stick ibolt in the middle and have it be the translator between those, and basically be able to move your data back and forth in real time. So it's actually a very powerful thing to do. Now, what we'll do is actually go a little bit behind the scenes now and show you how we did that. So ibolt is a Windows-based server, typically. It's going to be running on, obviously, in your racks. There's no software to be installed on the user's desktop. I didn't need to have anything installed to make SharePoint and PeopleSoft connect from my browser here. They're actually connecting in the back end with ibolt in the middle. So it's very transparent to the end user experience. They don't need to know that ibolt's there or doing it. They just know that if they put something in one side, it shows up in the other, or some sort of integration flow happens. So there is actually an interface, though, and it's only really available to the developer. I'm going to bring that up now. It's what we call the ibolt Studio. This is the ibolt Studio up on my screen now. It's kind of cool and visual. Has lots of icons to it. I'll go into a minute what they do. But basically, we create our integration flows here in a code-free way. We use these icons, which are called steps or components, to create basically a list of things that the ibolt server needs to do whenever an event happens. So whenever something comes in from SharePoint in this, or from PeopleSoft in this situation, ibolt first sends an email, then it validates the XML keys, then it talks to SharePoint to see if the vendor already exists or not. So it's just querying it to see, all right, is it there? If it is, it's going to go ahead and do an update. If it's not, it goes to the right and does an add. And basically, this is sort of a decision tree. The ibolt engine is going to start from the top and run the components from top to bottom and decide which way to go based on what the state of the data is, right? Whether it's actually a new vendor or whether it's a vendor that needs to be updated. Actually, we also have a bit of a Salesforce thing in here. I think it was sending that vendor off to Salesforce as well. Not part of this demo, but it's something we can do. And then it's actually going to go ahead and read the response and update and send a response back to PeopleSoft to say, okay, yeah, I got it, thank you. So then PeopleSoft will stop sending it. So basically then what we're doing here is we're creating a SOA-based architecture. So we've created an integration flow here that can add vendors to SharePoint and update them as well. But by creating this little HTTP endpoint here that PeopleSoft dials into, we've created an API that really anything else out there can do. So if you have vendors also in your another environment, all you can do is basically, with a little bit of work here, if anything, is tell it to send the XML here into ibolt, and ibolt will then do this, run the same flow without needing to make any other changes. Basically gives you a lot of reusability of your existing layer. ibolt is really reusable in itself, in that once you've got it installed, you can always add new flows. So this was the flow we originally did that went from PeopleSoft to SharePoint. That was cool. Then we wanted to figure out how to go the other way. We just added new flows to our project, which is basically what this is. We then ended up querying the vendor out of SharePoint to see if it was been changed or not. Then we did some mappings. I'm going to bring up what's called our ibolt mapper, and basically this is a visual mapping tool that allows us to draw the connection between SharePoint and PeopleSoft. And it actually looks kind of complicated. It is a little bit with this because there's about 50 fields we mapped. We visually connected the left side, which is SharePoint, to the right side, which is my PeopleSoft environment. And I can visually draw lines across by creating these little mapping lines to tell it how the data is going to move. So if I wanted something to come from the user in SharePoint to go to vendor field C30 in PeopleSoft, I just need to make that little line just like that, and the next time the server ran it, if I deployed it, it would actually go ahead and make that change in the mapping and reflect those new mappings. So that would give me a very, very easy way to create my mappings and also to maintain them later, because I can come back in and see how things are mapped very easily and make modifications to them. The schema for PeopleSoft is actually quite complicated, but ibolt gives it to us in a very visual way and allows us to do very easy ways of creating the lines between them. So I'm not going to get burdened down by line after line of code, and if we had to do this in .NET, it would be very, very complicated, I'm sure. So I'll just back up and close the mapper because I didn't like what I changed to it. And then we use data mappers ubiquitously all over ibolt. So in here later on, we'll be updating SharePoint using our adapter. And actually, all I needed to do was just map and tell SharePoint that I wanted to update a list. And what I wanted to set was the transaction ID and whether or not there was an error and things like that. So we're giving maximum visibility to the other side based on whether or not there was an error from PeopleSoft. We're actually able to update a success or error in SharePoint and let the user know that whether or not something happened. Maybe the vendor got deleted and the update didn't succeed, or maybe the state code they entered was invalid, things like that. We can bring those errors all the way back into the SharePoint environment so it's right in front of the user and they know without needing to have the IT staff in the middle chase down problems. So that's a very, 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 very useful tool to be able to do. So on the PeopleSoft side, we're just using ibolt's HTTP connector, which is one of our out-of-the-box technology adapters that can do things. And this is just basically calling an endpoint here, and I'll actually show you where it's going. It's actually calling our PeopleSoft server here in Magic's office in Laguna Hills, so at PeopleSoft@magicinc.com. Really, that server could have been anywhere. We don't really care. It could have been in India. It could have been in Australia. It doesn't matter. Because it's just a web technology, ibolt can go ahead and work with that across. Also, one nice thing about it is we actually can, we do natively support SSL, so if you went to go ahead in here and put in an HTTPS, boom, ibolt's then automatically working with this web service via SSL. So without any problem. So most of our adapters and connectors natively support the security and things like that available from the different APIs we're calling. For instance, when I wanted to work with SharePoint, like we did earlier here, I worked with the SharePoint list of vendors. If I wanted to do that, I would need to learn how to work with Microsoft's web services and how SharePoint likes to work with lists and how I need to format it and need to learn how to customize all of my calls to the various lists in my SharePoint environment, which as you probably know, could be changed. People can go and add columns, and they can add rules, and they can change data types, things like that very, very easily. One of the nice things about SharePoint is it makes it easy for the user to customize things, which makes integration typically very hard to do. However, ibolt's able to overcome that actually by using our SharePoint adapter. What that does is it actually will read my SharePoint environment. So all I need to do is set up a resource, which I did. I just needed to set up a SharePoint resource knowing actually the name of the server, what my user is on the server, maybe a password if there is one, if I have a password, or site if there's a site, of course. Hopefully I have a password, of course. And then I just need to visually drag the SharePoint connector from the palette down in the bottom left over onto what we call the flow, and then drop it. And it throws a new one at the bottom. And what that does is just creates a new step in the process that needs to be done. I need to give it a little bit more configuration, so I'll right-click and hit Configure. ibolt is going to let me work with lists and libraries and things like that. It's going to browse the server for all of the lists available out on the server, so I can then work with, say, customers. Say select. It'll allow me to do adds, updates, and deletes, which are all the basically simple operations you can do in SharePoint, and then work with whatever fields I want to work with. So maybe I only want to work with some fields like addresses, or maybe I want to work with them all, so I'll just leave it defaulted. And then say OK. It's going to actually show me that list in a data mapper like we saw earlier, and then show me the different fields that are available in it and what their data types are. So I can see comments as a string. I can see ID might be, well, one of these is probably a integer, things like that. So I can see what the data types are and map accordingly into that. Very, very easy to do. All I need to do is have a data source, which could be anything out there like databases, which we work with, which is like MS SQL, Oracle, DB2, DB2 400. And we also have a lot of ODBC gateways we can use. And or XML, which might have come from say PeopleSoft in the situation. Flat files are very common if you're working with EDI or other types of CSV files, and our own internal variables as well. And it lets us map right into SharePoint very easily by using the connector. In this situation, we're using just a handful of components, but if I go ahead and expand this list, you can see we actually have a lot of out-of-the-box components that work with various internal systems, such as ibolt's lock-in resources, other technology adapters like HTTP, FTP, LDAP, things like that. And there's also a lot of ones that we actually really like, which are our ERP adapters, such as working with JDE, working with SAP systems, working with Salesforce, working with SharePoint. These basically give us a gateway into those systems where we probably could have used them in other ways that ibolt can do, but by having an adapter, it gives us much simpler integration, and it allows us to reuse a lot of the existing code in ibolt very easily by just basically having predefined methods by working with things like I did with the SharePoint adapter. So this is basically where ibolt projects are created. It's called the Developer Studio. It's not used by the end user. This is used by an actual ibolt developer to create our different scenarios and how things will communicate with the ibolt server. So then if we want to see how the ibolt server runs, we have what's called the ibolt monitor. And this is actually pretty cool. It's actually a tool that shows me a real running server. I can see that the PeopleSoft project is running because it has a green light there. And I can see how many threads it's using and how hard it's working and how many requests have come through. At the same time, I can see all the projects that I have shut off because they're for demos that are unrelated for other things. So I can then drill into the one that's running and go into the PeopleSoft POC project, and I can see what's running across the server. I actually get to see the messages that went across. So at 10:30, I tested the demo before you guys were on. We can see that SharePoint message came through from PeopleSoft. I can see then later on we saw another message come through 11:23, and actually I can drill in and see the message. This right here is the XML from PeopleSoft that ibolt was able to read, and then we map this into SharePoint. And then later on, we actually see if I go back to the monitor, I can see the response from SharePoint. And SharePoint says, yeah, we made ID number 34, everything's okay. And then later on, we actually get to see a message that we were sending to PeopleSoft, which is, I believe, this. This was then something ibolt mapped to PeopleSoft. So we can see the messages going across in the monitor. So it gives you maximum traceability and ways to drill into the data that went across. So if something went wrong, either in development or in testing or in production, there's a lot of ways that you can actually go and research what the problem was and see every single data element, or just have a nice high-level view. Yes, I see things are going across. I don't see any errors. I can set my filter here to see only errors, which there are none, or I can see just certain types of messages. So it gives me a way of seeing exactly what the ibolt server is doing, how it's working, if things are going across, and then being able to drill into an individual message if I need to. So it's actually a very, very cool tool. It comes standard with ibolt. Anytime you buy an ibolt server, you get the monitor. So rest assured you'll have that. I've managed to only leave like 5 or 6 minutes for questions, so maybe I should turn it over to Glenn and see if we've got any questions through the chat, and if anybody has anything specific. If there's anything maybe specific to your environment, you can also email us later to see if we can answer your specific question, if maybe it's not relevant to everybody. But
no problem. We have a question coming in here from Jonathan Ryan. He says, what kind of training do you offer for ibolt?
Sure, we have a lot of different scenarios for that. We have training that you can do in our office here in Southern California every quarter or so, every 3 months. We have a class you can come out and enjoy the good weather in California while you learn how to do ibolt for 3 days. We also do on-site training, so if you want us to come out and train a group of developers, we can do that. We can send a person out to your office and do that. Also, we have scenarios where if we are, say if we're doing a project for you, we can also train your people as we do it. So we can show them how we're doing it, and sort of basically give them a hands-on view into how their project's coming together, and they can learn it with the interest of being able to support it later or write additional projects. And then occasionally we also do one-day webinars over at WebEx where we'll teach you more in depth how to use a single component. So maybe we'll do a webinar on how to use the JDE component or the Salesforce component or something like that. So we have a lot of different training available out there, and we have a whole department dedicated to do that.
We have a question from Sajid. He says, when the PeopleSoft changes to Fusion, can we use this to integrate information with SharePoint the same way? So you're obviously referring to Fusion Applications, which is Oracle's new blended ERP and overall applications capability that's going to sort of take in the best of eBusiness Suite, the best of PeopleSoft, the best of JD Edwards conceptually, and provide a new Fusion application. And we're starting to see some of these being released very slowly to small numbers of customers. Yes, the architecture of Fusion is open in the same way that PeopleSoft is, in the same way that JD Edwards is, and so there are web services and other kinds of open approaches that are included. So ibolt is definitely based on the same service-oriented architecture principles that Fusion applications are designed to fit into. So that should not be an issue or problem. I don't know if you had anything to add on that, Ryan, or?
No.
Yeah, it's something that customers are asking about in terms of a conceptual thing, but there's not really been any real demand for it yet. So it's kind of a future thing still, but conceptually, absolutely no problem there. Another question came in from Michael. What setup on the PeopleSoft side needs to be done? Integration broker, comp, INTF, and so forth.
Wow, we have. I have to admit, we had a PeopleSoft vendor kind of put it together with us, so we'd have to definitely ask them. But I don't think it was very much. They were able to do it in about just a day or two. Get the endpoint up for us to call. So.
Right, just in terms of working with the integration broker on the PeopleSoft side.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Great. And then another question was, would the slides be available? Yeah, the slides are definitely available, but you might also want to know that the recording of the entire webinar, including Ryan's demonstration, which is probably the meat of it, it will be available on our website probably by Monday at the latest. And if you send an email, if you need access to the slides, I can send them to you in PDF format, so it's a little smaller file size. Send the email to info@magicsoftware.com.
Also, sometimes when you close the WebEx, it asks if you want to save. So look for that. You may be able to save it right away. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Let's see. Do we have any other questions? I don't see any other questions coming in. So I want to thank everyone for joining us. We want to encourage you to reach out so that we can follow up. Oh, I'm sorry. There is one other question. What are the ibolt components we need to install and where? Meaning on the PeopleSoft servers and SharePoint servers to have the rules set up running.
There is nothing you need to have installed on the PeopleSoft server or the SharePoint server to make ibolt work. We use the native API.
Right. So we're using so you could basically put ibolt wherever it's convenient for you.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. Some people put it on its own server. Some people put it on a physical server. Some people put it on a larger server that just has extra capacity.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
It could be on a VM. It could be wherever.
All right. There's another question here that says, do you have a differentiation doc for Scribe and your software? It's a great question. I don't actually have a competitive kind of thing relative to that environment, John. But if you send me an email to info@magicsoftware.com, that'll trigger us to get a response to you on that, because we'd be happy to look at it a little more closely and give you that answer. Generally speaking, where we see differences, as we understand it, is that ibolt has a much broader component library and availability, and is really designed to work with a wider variety of environments. But that's just the broad generalization there to answer your question. Okay. It looks like that's the end of the questions. So again, thanks for joining us. We look forward to seeing you again on another Magic Software webinar very soon.
Thank you.